Great, thank you very much and welcome back. We are delighted to be joined by an esteemed panel for today to mark the International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. We are joined here by Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda, the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Delphine Schantz, who is the Director of the UN Office for the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, and Kalliopi Mingeirou, the Chief of the Ending Violence Against Women section of UN Women. Deputy Executive Director, welcome, and you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dear members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, my heart is heavy as I address you on the report that UN Women and UNODC did publish and which we are launching today on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Rebecca Chiptigei was a long-distance professional runner from Uganda. Rebecca represented her country at several world champions, and including the marathon on the 2024 Olympics. Rebecca was powerful, passionate, successful, and brave. She was also a survivor of violence against women. She managed to escape her abusive relationship. Rebecca was killed in September 2024 by her former partner, who doused her with petrol and set her alight. Rebecca was coming from our patriarchal societies, which at times feel so undermined when women are successful and own their power. So today, on the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, we remember Rebecca and all the women that lost their lives at the hands of abusive partners, family members, and others. Today we are sharing Rebecca's story to say femicide is still happening whilst we share the report on the experiences that we had, the data from 2023. Her story is the tip of the iceberg. She is one of the 51,000 women and girls worldwide who were killed by their intimate partners and other family members in 2023, as our data is showing. This means that on average, one woman was killed every 10 minutes by someone within their family. And no country is excluded. The joint UN Women UNODC report, Femicide in 2023, global estimates of intimate partner and family member femicides we are launching today reveals that femicide, which is the most extreme manifestation of violence against women and girls, that often represents the fatal final act in a series of violent acts, remain alarming and staggering levels. Data from the report also points that it is in their very homes that women and girls are less safe, as most of them are killed by their intimate partners. Families and our homes are supposed to be places of joy, of safety, and where we enjoy our being, and where women and girls can thrive. Yet we know that these figures, as alarming as they are, may not capture the full scale of this horrendous crime, because criminal justice recording and investigation practices vary across countries, and in many cases, only gender-related killings perpetrated by intimate partner or family member are classified as femicide. While these numbers are alarmingly high, the true scale of femicide may be much higher. The gender-related killing of women and girls is a crime that continues to be under-detected. We are concerned that efforts to identify femicide seem to be slowing down. In this context, we call for further commitment from countries in ensuring that every victim is counted and that data and evidence are generated for a better understanding of the types of gender-related killings of women and girls, femicides can and must be prevented, but it starts by understanding the scope of the issue and identifying the risk factors that can be preventatively addressed. In too many cases, victims of femicide had previously reported violence, and their killings could have been prevented. Prevention can be achieved by providing the means for early intervention. Early warning systems can be effective when they are supported by fully operational referral pathways to ensure access to survivor-centered support and protection. Amongst this offer of services, ensuring gender-responsive policing and justice services are key. We know that less than 40% of the women who experience violence seek any sort of help. That is because significant barriers continue to hamper the implementation and enforcement of laws. This includes lack of access to resources, information on the part of the women and the girls on where to access these services, institutional obstacles, patriarchal systems, and gender stereotypes prevalent in male-dominated services such as security, the police, and justice institutions. Very often, women and girls are also victimized throughout the judicial process, which deters them from reporting to officials. We also see that sometimes, even when violence is reported and action is taken, such as protection orders, women and girls continue to be killed. This is not acceptable. Justice must be accessible. It must be effective by being provided with the right resources. We are running out of time, and women and girls can no longer wait. Before joining the UN, I was running a shelter of survivors of gender-based violence. I know how it feels every day. As we approach the Beijing Plus 30 review, at Beijing, the role of the media was emphasized, and I want to appreciate that over the last 30 years, and as we launched this report, the media has stood with women of the world in telling the story. And as we enter the final years to realize the Sustainable Development Goals, we urgently need to see greater investments in comprehensive strategies that prioritize survivor-centered holistic support, gender-responsive policing and justice, reparations for families and victims, and prevention by addressing the root causes of violence against women and girls, including through transforming harmful masculinities, social norms, and eliminating structural gender inequalities and gender stereotypes. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Executive Director. Delphine, please.
Thank you very much, Stéphane, Madam Executive Director, dear member of the press. Let's now maybe delve into the findings of this report that we launched today. So the focus was on the femicide committed in the domestic sphere. We're going to see why, which are the most prevalent form of gender-related killings of women and girls. So this is some global and regional estimates of the number of women killed by intimate partner or members of their families that have been available in 2023. Some of the trends, selected practice for preventing some of those killings, and also some of specific case studies that we've studied, identified, made available to us by France, South Africa, and Colombia. Collecting data on femicide as opposed to female homicides is necessary to really develop more targeted prevention strategies and enhance the public awareness on this very critical issue. Let me just say at the outset that the number of countries reporting data on the killings of women and girls by intimate partner and members of their family peaked in 2020 at 75 countries, but subsequently has decreased by half in 2023 as compared to 2020, with Europe and Americas registering the highest share of reporting cases. So let's look at this report a bit specifically. So 60%, so that is a bit more than 51,000 of the almost 85,000 women and girls killed intentionally worldwide in 2023 were murdered by their intimate partners or other family members. Both the number of women and girls killed internationally overall and the number of those who were killed by intimate partners or family members have increased compared to previous years. On average, 140 women and girls worldwide lost their lives every day at the hands of their partner or close relatives. Africa is the region with the highest number of victims in aggregated term, with an estimate on a bit more than 21,000 victims by intimate partners or victim-related. Accounting for the highest number of victims of intimate partner family-related femicide related to the size of its population. Before Americas and Oceania, that also have recorded rates of 1.6 and 1.5 victims per 100,000, respectively, in 2023, and then some lower rates in Asia and Europe. The home was mentioned by Madam Deputy Executive Director, remains the most dangerous place for women and girls. Estimates based on available data suggest that the largest share of intimate partners, family members killings in Europe and in the Americas are committed by intimate partners, with 65 and 58 respectively recorded in 2023. So more by intimate partners. But as opposed to this, in Africa, Asia, and Oceania, some data actually suggest that the majority of female are actually victims more by family-related homicide, not so much the partner. 3/4 femicides are committed in victims' home and 11% in the streets or public places. 37 of women were killed by intimate partners after the victim had reported a previous record of sexual, physical, or psychological violence by a partner. But however, only 7% of the femicide cases where the victim had been subject to previous form of violence, the perpetrator had received a restraining orders by authorities. That very often lead to some obvious conclusions. Around 80% of all the homicide victims recorded in 2023 were men, and 20% were women. However, 60% of all women who were intentionally killed in 2023 were victims of intimate partner family-related homicides. In contrast, only 12% of all male homicide victims in 2023 were attributed to killings by intimate partners or family members. So let's look at some of the proposed action contained in the report. Well, first of all, the primary attention addressed at changing social norms and attitude in both women and girls and boys through specific, dedicated, tailor-made educational curriculum and courses to build up the relationship skills and fostering a broader understanding of acceptable behaviors. Second, the legal responses, such as criminalizing femicide as a standalone offense, and only very few countries do have included in their penal code such a dedicated offense, or at least provide in the penal code some aggravating circumstances for homicide offenses, which yet again is only in a few countries. Let's look also at the criminal justice responses. In several countries, that entails the establishment of specialized units within the police, judiciary, and prosecution services to investigate and prosecute offenses related to gender-based violence. And also, as we've seen before, the better use of restraining orders. Multi-agency approaches, investigation and prosecution of domestic violence cases have been introduced in several countries according to the legal provision stipulated in their respective legislation. That typically involve not only the police, but also social services, prosecution, health services, and other to facilitate the communication and collaboration throughout the whole chain of criminal investigations. Public campaign and advocacy efforts, as the one we are for which we are gathered here today, is also very relevant to really change the mindset and really shed light on this problem and the need for better granular data. Some states have actually used UNODC, UN Women's Statistical Framework for measuring gender-based violence, particularly also outside the private sphere, like particularly in the public spheres, and also some specific femicide which are not necessarily related to or committed by family members or intimate partners. These statistical frameworks have actually yielded results, as you've seen in the report, particularly in the case in France, South Africa, and Colombia. But persistent gaps remain in part of Africa and Asia, which really hamper the possibility and the availability of longer-term trends. So despite all those resources that governments and other stakeholders have done to really enhance the information related to femicide, these accounts and these cases really remain very alarming. Gender-based violence remains deeply embedded in societal norms and gender stereotypes that will require long-term and effective strategies to eradicate. And such report really is supposed to be a tool for member states to really determine and identify that the more data you have, the better strategy you can actually put in place and have a better awareness of some of the entities, particularly the police, when they provide records on homicides, that they also need to identify and to clearly define what is the motive for those killings, because that really help define overall some policy and have policy making action, clear action be taken to address some of the very alarming figures that I've been presenting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll take some question. Edie?
Thank you all very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. You both called this report very alarming. And obviously, the perpetrators are all men. What do you see as the trend going back to the time of the Beijing conference and looking forward on why this keeps happening, and have things gotten worse? And I know you mentioned some preventive actions, but the trend does not seem to be going in reverse. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you so much. I was at Beijing as a young woman. We should have met somewhere in Beijing. There was, from our work in Southern Africa, women who did a quilt on femicide. So, yes, for a long time, women have been dying at the hands of being killed by their loved ones. Why is it the trend continuing? And we really appreciate this collaborative work with UNODC to have current data. I think first is that we still need really to address the gender stereotypes, that women are human with rights, and the right to life cannot just be taken. So the gender stereotype, the social norms, is still embedded in the psyche of society. Secondly, is that this is killing which is associated with power over women, power. And why it also continues at times, it's because we continue to have impunity. On work around violence against women, there is still impunity. We still have a lot of perpetrator anonymity in many of our communities. And also, it's even much more difficult with femicide, because when the woman dies or is killed, it means the family members have to bring justice against another family member, a close member of the family. So just the access to justice issues within the family, especially if it is also for the children of the victim, it's very complex. But as I talked about the issue of power, it's hard to fight violence against women, and during these 16 days, it's an issue we are raising, that those with economic power, political power, power of leadership within our various traditions, power should not be used to perpetuate violence. Power should be used to facilitate options for prevention. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefano, then Abdelhamid. I'm sorry.
I
Please,
just wanted
of
to
course.
just to complement
of course, sorry.
everything. Of course, I mean you've been covering the gender stereotypes, but there are actually two issues. The first is really the data itself. During the COVID, there was a real focus because we've actually really shed light of some cases of intimate partners, of family members that really killing some of the women because they were actually restrained in the same places for a certain number of months. So we've seen like an increased number of reporting on those cases because it was one of the direct consequences of COVID. Now, in the wake of COVID, it seems like it's not so much a priority because there are so many other issues. So it's kind of becoming more secondary reporting. And that's why it's very, very relevant to actually have this kind of very detailed data that are being collected. But for this, you need to really have some policy decision made that the Statistical Commission will be empowered with this kind of data information and will be able to better put some specific criteria to the police and to the prosecution so that they can really look at specific cases and see whether they could then also be labeled as a femicide. The other is the criminal justice response. We see so few states that actually have criminalized femicide as a standalone offense. Not even as aggravating circumstances, I was saying in my statement. So for most, it's actually reported as it is a homicide. And therefore, because of all the stereotypes that Madam Deputy Executive Director has actually been saying, this is not seen as a priority. Hence, really always not so much being awarded both in terms of resources for campaign, but also for actually training the police to be able to really report more and also invest so much more on the prevention.
Just a quick follow-up. What's preventing the Statistical Commission from actually taking on this data study?
Well, the Statistical Commission, the UN Statistical Commission, have actually tasked both UN Women and UNODC to come up with a statistical framework, which we have done, to be able to account for this type of femicide information and to collect data that has happening both in the private spheres as well as outside spheres. And we've seen a bit more data on what some countries have actually labeled femicide, which are not necessarily committed by intimate partners or family members, but as nonetheless femicide because it was an intentional killing of a woman for a specific goal. So nothing prevents it. It's just that we have now a framework. Some countries have actually used this framework, some have not, and this is why it's so important that we're here today, so that this kind of information can really better channeled to the member states that I see that are really having more granular data, definitely yields process and can influence policy making.
Thank you. Stefano?
Thank you, Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York, Ital Press. Are you worried that the President-elect of the United States was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman and another man Trump chose as a head of the Pentagon was accused by another woman of raping her?
For any country across the world, we just continue to say any crime of violence against women must be prosecuted. And that is the standard of the UN, to just say violence against women is unacceptable, and where the crime is committed, the crime is prosecuted.
Abdelhamid.
Thank you so much for the press conference. My name is Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have few related questions. First, if you can share with us some of the data about the countries that had improved between the year, you said 2012 2020 it was the worst, and now 2023 is much better. Things had improved. If you share which countries had improved. And second, if you have kind of mechanism to reach out to these countries and draw their attention, do you have the system of naming and shaming? What do you do to help scandalize these countries? And if there is also any improvement on this, what's called honor killing. And the last thing, I assume that your mandate doesn't cover the women victims of wars. That's why you didn't mention Gaza, for example, and the tens of thousands of women who were killed and maimed. Thank you very much.
Let me respond to the two questions around what we are doing and the issue on Gaza, and then my colleagues can respond to the specific questions. Any killing everywhere is unacceptable. Any killing in war, in humanitarian situations, is unacceptable. This report was specifically focused on the femicide, but I just want on record to say violence against women in whatever context is unacceptable, and we continue to speak out, whether it's in Gaza, in Ukraine, in the Sudan, in Haiti, everywhere. It's unacceptable. That's why we continue to ask for an end to wars, because we didn't just have the unwanted killings and there were unwanted deaths. So just to be on that point. In terms of what we are doing, the United Nations is fully committed to supporting member states across the world. And this is why in the work that we do, both in developing countries and in developed countries, we continue to have the issue of violence against women as a key priority. Hence, the 16 days of activism starting today with the International Day of Commemoration, which actually is also painful because when the Dominican Republic brought the resolution, it was after the murder of the Mirabella sisters. It took women to be killed in order for us to even have an International Day on ending violence against women. So across the world, and our work in countries is important. And the measuring, you asked where do countries bring the issue together? Annually, we meet here in the Commission on the Status of Women. There is always a session around violence against women. And next year, we know that the high-level political forum would be focusing on, among the SDGs, on SDG 5, which also includes a very systematic way between now and then to look at the issue of violence against women. We are therefore looking forward to this report being able to shape the discussions that would happen among governments, among countries, among communities on accelerating efforts to prevent, to support survivors, and to access justice. I'll ask my colleagues to respond to these other specific issues.
Thank you very much. Again, at the outset, let's say that we've been collecting probably better data from Europe, Asia than other continents. So. Countries have actually been using our statistical framework, the UN Women and UNODC statistical framework. They are mentioned in the report. There's some specific case studies on France, South Africa, and Colombia. We see how they've been being able to really put provide more granular data on the kind of, and particularly on specific cases that are really now been studying more in depth with what was the actual motive, could have been prevented, what action were actually taken or not taken ahead of time, whether some legislation have been taken. That was actually the case in Colombia and South Africa, and also the institutional settings where any working group were established, interagency task force set up to specifically looking at those cases. So these are some of the examples of countries that have really used the statistical framework and really definitely improve their recording. The issue we have is that, and I've said before that we've seen a decrease by half of the countries in 2023 that had reported in 2020, but they're not necessarily the same countries reporting. So going into what could be a really incentive, as you know, the UN does not have any name and shame list, and this is certainly not our approach. But what we want is really launch those kind of awareness raising campaign, but also working very closely in the country with the statistical, the respective statistical commission, but also some of the criminal justice officers, to be able to work with them on helping them build some solid cases with the relevant information that can really then help our work in terms of developing trends. Because it's very difficult to actually develop trends when you don't really collect regular annual data. So this is what really, this is a plea. This report is really making a strong advocacy for better data from member states.
Yes, please.
So maybe I could add a little bit regarding the progress that we have seen in general, because I think we need to give a little bit a glimpse of hope. Because we have seen some progress from governments, especially in the area of effecting laws and policies in order to protect women and girls from violence happening at home, but also other forms of violence. So as of 2023, we have around 104 governments that they have legislation in place protecting women and girls from domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Also, we had an increase of budgetary allocations to services to be in place in order to provide support to survivors in the aftermath of violence. And I think these are some significant signs of progress and commitment from governments. Also, if I can complement around femicide, because we have seen some very concrete progress in some of the countries that UNODC had already referred to. So we had seen even in South Africa some decrease of femicides in South Africa. And there, some of the reasons, and that was a very significant study that the Medical Research Council has undertaken a couple of years ago, and some of the reasons for that, it was first that we had some sustained legislation that it was protecting women and girls from violence more broadly. Because we know, as we heard, that femicide is happening, and before the femicide happens, we have signs of domestic violence and abuse happening against the victims of femicide. So having protection against domestic violence, it was important in South Africa. The second important element that South Africa had in place, it was firearm control legislation. Because we know very often that firearms is connected to domestic violence and increases the risk of such violence. And the third very important factor in South Africa, it was the women's movement. For many years, that they had some sustained advocacy in order to raise awareness about the extent and the impact of femicide, of intimate partner violence, and the fact that the whole country was at risk of losing if they didn't address these issues. And Colombia, for example, and you mentioned UNODC, Colombia, also they took really some substantive measures there because they knew that violence was happening at home before a femicide, and they saw an escalation of violence in general. What they did, they brought different services together in order to really develop tailored risk plans for individual cases of women. So then they were ready in order to address the particular cases of women that they were at risk of violence to make sure that they do prevent such femicide. So we have some really good practices in place, but we need more increased political commitment, more resources in order to implement them.
Great.
Yes, this is a very important issue of honor killing. Essentially, it's the same reflection on how do we need to shift social norms in order to respect life and dignity, and also ensure that communities continue to respect that it is about protecting the basic rights, and that the social cohesion of a society does not come through violence. The social cohesion of a society comes through having social norms that affirm life, that affirm coexistence, and that give opportunities to women and girls. As UN Women, we've worked many years around range of issues, and as the UN on issues such as female genital mutilation, issues such as ending child marriage, which concept I still question, because a child cannot marry. So we are actually talking about child rape, child sexual exploitation. And therefore, the shift in norms is very important in order for us to address the issue. Therefore, honor killing is not acceptable. Any killing is not acceptable.
Thank you. One last question.
Thank you very much for this press briefing. Actually, my question is follow-up questions. Mr. Abdulhamid already asked about the country. You have mentioned you are mostly working for Africa, US, Europe. I didn't see any Muslim countries, including Gaza, Afghanistan, Turkey, because I worked for a long time in Turkey. I know that it's a huge problem. They are femicide, domestic violence. So, and there are many organizations, women-related organizations. They are very actively working with international organizations. I'm not sure with exactly UN Women or not. I'm just wondering, what do you think? It's also important to look for or pay attention about this area too?
We know that earlier this year were highly reported cases of femicide in Turkey. And there was a massive mobilization, including just by ordinary people. UN Women spoke on the issue, and I've just recently come from the region and was part of the regional consultation for Europe and Central Asia. And the issues that we are discussing today, violence against women, femicide, there is no country or community that is immune to the issues of violence against women. This is a global issue that we need a global action. And also, one is one too many. At times we look at the statistic, but the moment when we just work with the individual family that has been affected, one is one too many. And definitely we are asking the member states, our governments, our communities to scale up prevention. To scale up prevention, because especially with femicide, even by the time we seek justice, that woman or that girl would already have died. So we need prevention in order to end the shift in social norms, the relevant laws, the relevant tools around services, and the relevant data. And this is why our work with UNODC is so critical, to say we need the data, we need the statistics to inform the social change that is happening, but also to inform the kind of services that needs to be there.
Let me just very quickly add that on the criteria to actually better report those kind of cases, we've of course been targeting criminal justice officers, but also working very closely with academics and civil society organizations. And in some countries, there is a number of those organizations that are very active in recording and accounting for some of those cases, which are not necessarily prioritized by government, but nonetheless exist, and through their action are made known worldwide. And so we've also been working very closely with them, and they're really to empower them with this kind of reporting and understanding in some of the cases that they've actually been investigating. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, it's always the government defining a policy, but they've really been active in a number of states in lobbying the government in trying to shift some of the behavior in terms of reporting and putting the focus on some of those domestic violence that can actually lead to femicide. Thank you.
Thank you. Kalliopi Delphine, Deputy Executive Director, thank you very much for being with us, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.